It's live.
Yay, this is Tami Brunk and Cayelin Castell, and we are bringing you the mysteries of the Venus Synodic cycle.
And so as Tami is getting the slideshow ready, we just to give you a little bit of an insight, I want to say, even though when you watch this, it may not be anywhere near the time we recorded it, but we've been having such an interesting time getting it together, and that is because Venus is about to station direct, and so we're really honoring her at this time and her whole entire cycle that begins when Venus rises up into the morning sky as a bright star, and she's always retrograde at that time. So we will be starting with the slides. We've got some great images and visuals for you. This first slide actually is something to look at. The morning sky, you see the bright crescent moon above Venus in the morning sky, little image you see here, and it's a crescent moon that is losing light, and it looks like a C. I always think it looks like a C in the sky. And then in the evening sky, it's always the opposite because it's waxing and gaining light. And so if you're, and also of course you're going to be seeing them at different times of the day, but just so that if you're ever looking at pictures of the moon, if you see that waning moon looking like a C in the sky near the star Venus, you know that's a morning sky shot. And if you see the waxing moon looking like the opposite of a C, almost like parentheses, actually, I never thought of that before. Anyway, then that's the evening sky Venus. So are you ready to go, Tami?
Absolutely. So what we're wanting to do here is, this is really something special for those in our teleclass series too. It's just a very simple introduction to the Venus Synodic cycle, as well as just a little bit about how that connects to the Sumerian story of the descent of the goddess Inanna. And so we just want to give a little bit of an overview so you have a sense for how the cycle works.
Do you want to put it on the slideshow, or do you just want to keep the smaller slides?
It is actually on the slideshow.
Oh, because I'm seeing the sidebar, the slides on the sidebar.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is.
Okay. Is that, so you're seeing something different?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's okay. I mean, let's just go for it since we've had quite the time in getting to the point where we can get this recorded. So, yeah. So the overview of the Venus Synodic cycle, and you see here an image of a pentagram with a circle around it. And it's basically showing from the Earth's perspective, each time Venus rises as a morning star, and there are 584.25 days between the rising of Venus as a morning star. So that happens each time. It's about a 19-month cycle. And over 8 years, Venus will rise 5 times into the morning sky and create this pentagram. We'll see that again later in another slide. And so the cycle always begins when Venus rises because she's so bright and so powerful and you cannot miss her. And so we know that's where the cycle begins. And then we see Venus in the morning star phase. Then she goes into the underworld. We'll talk a little bit more about this. This is just the overview. And then the evening star phase, where she will go retrograde and then begin her process of getting ready to become a morning star again. And so the Venus return to the same place in the sky happens every 8 years. So if you happen to be turning a multiple of 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72, 80, 88, 96, within your next birthday, then you're probably in a Venus return.
So, and we thank you, Cayelin, and that's just a good beginning point to understand the way the cycle works, and just to have a little more understanding for why it is that this is so important, and to put it into context, it's to know that there have been many versions of the goddess. Venus has been seen, not in all cultures, but in many cultures, has been seen as representing the divine feminine. And so all across many cultures, When Venus rose, that was understood to be the goddess actually rising, emerging. And so she has been seen as Inanna, Ishtar, Al-Uzza, Astarte, Isis, Aphrodite, Persephone, Rhiannon, Lakshmi, Kali, Selene, Freya, Chaska, Barnumvir, Ixchel, and many, many, many others, just to name a few of them. These are some images of the different versions of the goddess who are connected to the mysteries of the Venus cycle, just to kind of put it in context. But we work with the Inanna mysteries. We work with Inanna because, Cayelin, do you want to talk a little more about that?
Sure. Well, it's an ancient Sumerian story, also the same story told by the Babylonians, only they called her Ishtar. And so the reason that we work with this is because it is the most intact story that comes to us. And we also know that the Sumerians and Babylonians actually reenacted this story, which is the description of how Venus moves through the sky and how to work with it ceremonially. And so it gives us a lot of information about how we can now apply that in current times and work with it ceremonially. So that's our intention here, is to give you more of that background of why we do this.
And so just to understand that this is also perhaps one of the few stories we know of that shows the entire Venus cycle playing out. The Inanna descent story, it describes that.
Right. I'm sorry. You know what? The slides aren't shifting for me for some reason, so I don't know. I guess you're seeing maybe different slides.
Oh, right now I have Venus cycle as initiation, journey through Inanna's 7 chakra gates.
I'm not seeing that slide, so I'm actually going to just pull it up on my own computer, so I'll same place.
Okay.
Oh, great! This is a fun thing of trying to figure out the technology.
Well, and we have noticed that the Venus cycle for us, this retrograde cycle, has been very interesting, and we could say that that has to do with the fact that we are working with Venus, and so we are impacted more powerfully by the fact that she's retrograde. And when a planet is in the process of stationing direct or retrograde, as Venus is right at this moment, it can have an impact on things like technology, not just Mercury.
When you're trying to do things that are more left brain and technical,
yes,
rather than right brained and sort of in the moment and magical, which is really what the retrograde cycle is about. Then it's like,
we should just be meditating or dancing or taking a bath or something. Here we are. We'll get there. So with the slide that I'm looking at right now, and hopefully you are too, we are talking about the Sumerian Inanna descent story, and we will share at the very end of this slide links where you can read another description of the Inanna descent story, so we won't go into great detail. Also in Cayelin's Venus bonus package, she tells the story, and we will probably do another later video that describes that. But for now, just to know that in the story of Inanna, this goddess, she decides to enter the underworld, and so she goes to the underworld, and on her way, she is required to pass through 7 gates on her descent. And at each gate, she removes a vestment or an article of clothing, a vestment of clothing. And then she is in the underworld, and she goes through a ceremonial death process. And then she emerges from the underworld and again goes through 7 gates, reclaiming each of her vestments at each of the gates. And so the way that this story corresponds to the Venus cycle is that the story begins when Venus rises as morning star, as Cayelin was describing earlier. That's the beginning of a cycle. And that during her descent, Inanna's descent process, that is the morning star journey, where she is descending and going through 7 or sometimes 8 gates. And then the ascent is the evening star journey, where again she goes through 7 or 8 gates. And the gates can be understood as the time almost about every month when Venus and the moon, the crescent moon, are together in the sky, like the images you saw at the very beginning of this presentation, where Venus and the moon come together about once every month. That's when Inanna would have crossed through a gate. And then the next layer of this, which is part of how we work with this as an initiatory process, is that we see each of these Venus moon gates as being a chakra, because it relates very much to the seven chakras, and many of the vestments, like the crown vestment and the breastplate at the heart, correspond very literally to those 7 chakras.
There's also a necklace at the throat, throat chakra. So that's and a waist belt at the solar plexus. So they're many of them are very literal. Some of them are just more in terms of how the descriptions are. It gives you a sense of what chakra is connected to.
Mm-hmm. So. Yes. So, and then in the journey, there's also a period in the Venus journey where Venus passes on the other side of the sun from the earth. And that is the period, it's about 2.5 months, where Venus cannot be seen in the morning or evening sky. And that is the period in the Inanna descent story where Venus would have been in the underworld going through her death and rebirth initiation.
So what slide are you showing now, Tami?
Okay, I'm showing the first Venus Synodic cycle slide, where Venus begins her retrograde phase in the evening sky. So I think they're actually...
So yeah, so this is not necessarily where the cycle begins, but it's sometimes helpful to understand the retrograde, because that is something that people don't always understand what's going on with the retrograde. So Venus always goes retrograde when she's in the evening sky, and it's really representative of the completion of the cycle that has been that was already in process. So it's like the end and beginning. It's that sort of in-between place. And she's retrograde in the evening sky for about 16 days. She'll drop into the underworld, or meaning she's traveling with the sun for about 8 days. And will make an exact conjunction with the sun while she is in this, it's called the shorter underworld, the short underworld, because she's only there for 8 days. Whereas in the other underworld that Tami was describing, it was almost 3 months. And so she drops out of the evening sky with the sun for 8 days, makes an exact conjunction with the sun, rises up in the morning sky 8 days later, and is in the morning sky about 16 days while she's retrograde. So if you think about that, it's 16 days in the evening sky retrograde, 16 days in the morning sky retrograde, 8 days in the underworld retrograde. That adds up to 40 days. Now, it's not always that exact, but it's approximate. So that's about how it works. And so we always, always, always begin the cycle of Venus when Venus rises in the morning sky before the sun, brilliant, really close to the earth, her brightest, stunning. You can't miss her. That's where the cycle begins, when she's first seen in the morning sky. And then when she goes direct, that's the beginning of her descent process.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm switching the slide now to the morning star descent process. So, the cycle begins while Venus is retrograde, but the retrograde cycle actually begins at the very end of the last cycle when she's in the evening sky. So now, right, so she is at the morning star phase. When she is Venus in the morning star phase, she meets with the waning moon 7, sometimes 8 times, representing the 7 gates Inanna passes through on her way to the underworld. And then, as I've mentioned before, at each gate, she gives up a vestment associated with the 7 chakras, releasing any distortions, blocks, beliefs, pain, trauma associated with these chakra energies. So when you're looking at this image, it's this kind of like image. You can see Venus, and then there's an RX. When you're looking to the left of this slide, it says Venus. Well, that's the Venus sign with a little heart, little circle and a little cross. That's Venus. The RX stands for retrograde. And then the little circle is conjunct. The circle with the little pointer is conjunct. And then right next to that is the sun sign. So that's Venus retrograde with the sun. It says short. This is a short underworld. This is like shorthand. Is retrograde, 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 going to the top of the first point of the M. This is where she is stationing direct, and then she's in the morning sky. And so you see the different Venuses represent when she's conjunct the moon.
And so basically, just so people understand what's being represented here, Venus is the first Venus that's above the horizon is actually after she's gone direct. But when she pops up over the horizon, and that dotted line is the horizon line, after she goes direct, it's not until she goes direct do we start counting the Venus-Moon conjunctions. And she's actually going higher and higher in the sky in this part of the cycle, and then she'll start to drop after she reaches her greatest furthest point away from the sun, or above the horizon is another way to look at that. Then she starts to drop back towards the horizon, and you can see she's headed to go below the horizon, where she'll be in the long underworld. That's the one that's between 60 to 90 days. And it's in this part of the story where she is basically dead and she's going through a death and rebirth process. It's a very shamanic part of the cycle.
Mm-hmm. So that's the morning star, and then Venus joins the sun, right, for 60 to 90 days. This is where she's in the underworld. And then she's dying to her old self, preparing to be reborn. And then you see her as evening star Venus, meeting with the waxing moon 7 to 8 times, returning through the 7 gates in the reverse order. So starting with the root chakra, second chakra, third chakra, and she's now transforming and becoming empowered from her initiation as she reclaims and regains her vestments. So you can see the little Venuses now marching up.
And again, in the evening sky, she does something very similar to what happens in the morning sky, and that is she reaches a point that she's going to be the furthest away from the sun before she starts dropping back to the horizon. And as she comes up in the evening sky, she is coming out from behind the sun. So she is not as bright as when she rises up in the morning sky. In the morning sky, she's really close to the earth. And she's only been with the sun for, very short, right around a week, 8 days. But in the evening sky, sometimes we see her right away, sometimes we don't. So we start counting the Venus-Moon conjunctions, and we count them until she gets to the retrograde. And she always goes retrograde in the evening sky, as we mentioned before, and then we'll drop below that horizon, meet with the sun again in that short underworld phase, and then re-rise up as a morning star.
So yeah, so she's ending now where we began in the first slide with that that little short underworld process. So that's a very kind of it is somewhat a complex cycle to describe. So this is perhaps the simplest way to describe it with simple images. So.
And just to say to people, if that does not make total sense to you, that's okay. We just kind of wanted to give you this information. And as we go through the cycle, as we go through this journey, it will make more sense as we go. And, for me, I actually had to work with it a few times before I totally got it, but you'll start to get it in your body, as we work with the story, as we work with each of the Venus. You go out and you see Venus and the moon together in the morning sky. Then you see that Venus is gone for several weeks. Then she reappears in the evening sky. You see her with the moon in the evening sky. So it begins to make more sense as we go through the cycle and actually live it.
And that is a part of why we feel that this is so exciting, is that there is part of us as human beings, we've known about this in the past. This is something people used to understand and know about because they felt it kinesthetically. They lived with it as the Sumerians did. They would have celebrated this every 8 years. So we're remembering something that we once knew. So it's in our genes, it's in our DNA. We understand it. So, but it takes a while. With our modern minds, our modern perceptions, to get it, and it's a left brain thing. But once you get it, it's magical. But it does take time. So it
right,
will
hold. But the good news about the video is you can go back and watch it a few times, and as we go through the different phases, maybe it'll become better or easier for you to understand. So not to worry if it doesn't make sense right in this very moment.
Yes. So just one more time, I'm now looking at the slide. We're kind of repeating ourselves, but this can be helpful. So in its path around the sun, again, Venus has 5 cycles of 584 1/4 days. taking 8 years to return to a starting point in the sky. So every time Venus rises as a morning star, she's in a different part of the sky, and she rises at a different time of year. So that's a different starting point. And this creates a 5-pointed star or pentagram. And that is a symbol that has been associated with the goddess for a very long time.
For eons of time.
Yes. So I'm now at the slide for the Venus Synodic cycle overtone. So just to understand that when Venus rises as morning star beginning a new cycle, the sign she rises in is the overtone for the full 584 days cycle. And so this sign that Venus rises in is the leading lady or the goddess active on the world stage for about 19 months. So
another way we could say that is to say that it's the archetype of the feminine that's being integrated into the collective psyche of humanity for that 19-month period. So, so it's the lead, even though Venus goes through lots of different signs through the whole cycle, and she doesn't stay in the sign of the overtone that she rises in, she does return. And that's actually very interesting to note that when she rises up in the evening sky, she's usually back in that sign or about to be back in that sign when she rises up. So this sign becomes very important and lets us know that this is the overarching theme for the particular Venus cycle that we're working with.
Well, and it just is also the case that whatever that sign is, Venus is going to spend way more time in that sign than she will spend in any other sign. And part of what we found to be very exciting about this work as well is just that, and working with it ceremonially, is that it gives us an opportunity to dismantle, to collectively and personally dismantle the distortions or anything that's needing healing, and to be created anew in this sign, whether it's Leo or Capricorn or whatever the sign of this, the overtone is. We get to work dynamically with that and dream in a new expression that is appropriate for the time of great change that we live in.
It's really exciting, and you know, when in the descent process in the story of Inanna, when she's releasing those vestments, it really is a description of letting go of the distortions or letting go of anything that is maybe more of a shadow expression or less than healthy. And so there's that stripping away of releasing, letting go as she's going down into the underworld. Of course, there she dies and is reborn. And when she comes back up in the evening sky and starts reclaiming, as described in the story, reclaiming those vestments, it's a healthy relationship because she has let go, she's surrendered, and she's now empowered to really bring this archetype back into the collective psyche in a new and really healthy way.
Yes. So, and then now I'm showing the slide where it shows the 5-pointed star with the different signs that we're currently working with. This will change, but we see the master cycle, or the cycle we start with, is the Capricorn cycle, because that's the one where Venus rises as morning star closest to the winter solstice. And at the turning of the ages, shamanic astrology would present the idea that it's very possible that the winter solstice point is acting now in a very similar way to what the spring equinox would have before. So that's kind of our beginning point for many things, is the winter solstice. And so with Capricorn, when we were working with the Capricorn cycle, we came to see that there were certain distortions, like doing addiction, was one of the distortions we found when we were working with Capricorn. And so we worked very powerfully to counter that, to release that, to heal that, and to bring in a different expression. But when you look at this 5-pointed star, you'll see the signs that we're currently, there are only 5 Venus overtones that we'll be working with at any given time. And so for now, we're working with Capricorn. Soon we will begin a new, we'll begin to work with Libra, Leo, Gemini, and Aries. So,
well, right, yeah. So, so we got inspired really to do this ceremonial journey when we were in the Capricorn overtone, and that won't happen again until January 15th of 2022. And so meanwhile, we're going to work with all of the other ones because we got such rich experience, sense of experience. And even if you don't have a lot of Capricorn in your chart, or you're not in your Venus return cycle, this proved to be really transformative and life-changing for, I know, for me and for a lot of people. The feedback we've been getting has been tremendous about this, how working with this cycle in the ceremonial way, with intention, with a group consciousness and a group intention, which of course exponentially increases the power of our personal intention. I love that part. And so it's been very amazing. And then we'll get to experience how it's different in each of the overtones. What's the difference? What's the different flavor? Even though the cycle is the same, she's still doing her exact same dance of rising up in the morning sky, retrograde, going direct, meeting with the moon 7 or 8 times, going into the underworld for almost 3 months, coming up into the evening sky, going retrograde after she's made her 7 or 8 conjunctions with the moon, and then, restarting that cycle. So it's every single point on the pentacle goes through the exact same process, but it has a different energy or flavor or archetype, however you want to look at that, that's being activated within that cycle. So it's pretty profound. And also will be very revealing to see how we experience this in different ways as we go through each of these.
So I'm now moving to the cycle, the slide that is honoring Capricorn, because as I'd mentioned before, we see Capricorn as kind of the beginning cycle. It's the master cycle. And Capricorn, the new way of looking at Capricorn that Daniel Giamario brought in a number of years ago is that Capricorn is to be in service to the circle of the grandmothers. And so one of the most powerful experiences, the first time we initiated this teleclass series and this amazing collective experience, is that the circle of the grandmothers, we called them in very strongly, and we came to feel that they had called us in as well. All of our participants, and really initiated this work. And so for that reason, we see the circle of the grandmothers as guiding all of the future Venus Synodic cycle initiations. And so at the turning of the ages. And so with gratitude and praises, we call them in. We call in the circle of the grandmothers for every circle, and we will work with them.
And they're so much fun.
They're so much fun. It's so amazing.
I know, we've been so blessed, and we're so grateful for their guidance, their support, their wisdom, and the ways that they have worked with each person who's been called to come and work with us to do this cycle. It's really magical and profound.
And to just also, I should also say, we, in this image, this is actually the Council of the Indigenous 13 Grandmothers, and we're not referring literally to them, but we think that they hold that energy in a very beautiful way, and that they showed up around the time that Daniel was beginning to get this insight that this is what the new Capricorn looks like. And again, when we're talking about the circle of the grandmothers, and we're seeing them as the ones, or the archetype of the feminine that is the most deeply concerned with the next seven generations, and that is concerned with really creating a new culture that honors the earth and the future generations. So they are who we work with.
Indeed. And we're so happy we get to do that.
Yes, it is a great pleasure. Yes. So I'm now looking at the additional resources. And we have a book that we like to recommend if you want to read more, learn more about Inanna's story, is Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, Her Stories and Hymns from Sumer, by Diane Wilkstein and Samuel Kramer. That's a really great place to start. There are other ways to tell the story, and the more you begin to dive into it, you will find that there are other ways, but this is a really, it's a very good translation. And so it's a nice place to start. Of course, we also, at the very last little resource here, is an online version of the story. And this is just one. There are many others, but it's a good place, again, that if you want to just go online very quickly and read a story about Inanna, you can do it there. And then Descent to the Goddess, A Way of Initiation for Women by Sylvia Brenton Pereira, is a Jungian woman's way of looking at the Annata descent myth as initiation. So,
and just to, so you know, it does not bring in the Venus cycle within it, but it's really useful in getting insight about how to work with that, because she really goes into the story and how it relates to our initiatory process. So, so it's just another resource that might be helpful.
Yes, yes, yes. So very, and it's good, you know, that the story itself is a very, very powerful story. And like our work with the Venus cycle, part of what's so exciting about it is that we're working with very deep mysteries. We're working with a very powerful story. And collectively, because we live at the turning of the ages, it is for us to break that story open and really look at it anew. So there's no one way to look at it that's correct. And there's no one way to go through this Venus initiation cycle that's correct. And that's also part of why we're so excited to be doing it collectively and dreaming it in a new way.
Because everybody brings such richness to the experience and insight. And, you know, so if you're just doing it by yourself, you might have your own insight and so on, which can be great. But it's really nice to see people having experiences through different lenses and to get that sense of how we can, with our intention, work to create a collective experience, because that is what the Sumerians did. They got together as a culture and reenacted the Venus cycle as an initiation, as a ceremony. And so that was really powerful for them to do that. And 6,500 years ago, they did it, they associated it more with Venus as a morning star. I mean, as a Aries, and when she was rising at the spring equinox. But we feel it's really important to do it for all of them. And that's yeah. So
that's what we get to do. And wow, the screen is doing something very strange. So maybe that this is our time to
say goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We're so happy. We hope you'll join us, or if you've already joined us, we hope you'll enjoy this presentation that we just made.
Yes, very much.